We live with the consequences of our choices every day. Some choices have bad consequences while others result in great blessings. The temptation to sin sexually is very alluring, but does it really offer what it promises? Join me today as we take a quick look at the Proverbs and examine the effects of giving in to our sinful sexual desires. Read with me Proverbs chapter 5, verse 7 through 14. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you lose your honor to others and your dignity to one who is cruel. Lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich the house of another. At the end of your life you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, "How I have hated discipline! How my heart spurned correction! I would not obey my teachers or turn my ear to their instructions, and I was soon in serious trouble in the assembly of God's people." You know, some sins have a generational effect. Sexual sins, especially adultery, can have repercussions that affect multiple generations. Solomon knew firsthand how adultery can affect a person's future. His mom and dad's relationship started with adultery, and he lost an older sibling to the effects of their sexual sin. Also, Solomon's own struggle with sensual pleasures led to multiple marriages with women he should not have married. And the children that he had from all of those women fought over his kingdom after his death. So Solomon addresses all his descendants when he pleads for them to listen. He commands their undivided attention and their unfailing obedience to the words he speaks to them. Sometimes Solomon sounds very repetitious with his pleas, but he is committed to repeating his warnings as many times as it takes to get the point across. How many times have you had to be warned about something before you began to listen? Now, Solomon also knew from experience that most sin will cost you more than you are willing or want to pay. Solomon's advice is firm and direct. In verse 8, he says not to even go near the door of the house of the seductress. The idea is to remove yourself from even the possibility of being tempted to sin. Take a different road. Go out of your way if you have to. It's that important. It is worth the inconvenience so that you can stay away from sin and its consequences. Solomon knew full well the dangerous power of physical urges. He had acquired a multitude of women and fully immersed himself in the pit of sensual pleasure. So he strongly warns us not to give any attention to or even consider giving into those desires. There is always a cost to be paid for sin. Solomon says in verse 9 that you can lose your honor and dignity to others. Everyone desires to have a good reputation. Everyone desires to be given respect and honor, but sexual sins can steal that from you. Solomon says in verse 10 that you can lose your wealth, and that the hard work that it took you to get what you have would be for nothing. The consequences of adultery can lead to losses like divorce, alimony payments, loss of job, loss of a house, loss of inheritance. And according to verse 11, sexual sins can also cause you to lose your health. 1 Corinthians 6:18 says, "Flee from sexual immorality." All other sins that a person commits are outside of the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Don't be fooled. Sexual sins have physical consequences too, such as sexually transmitted diseases, or even emotional and spiritual stresses that can cause physical health problems. Sin will take you farther than you want to go. It will make you stay longer than you want to stay. And it will make you pay more than you're willing to pay. Because all sins cause death and destruction. The picture that Solomon paints is of someone that is on the edge of total destruction. In Bible times, the penalty for adultery was stoning. It wasn't always enforced, but it was always a possibility. And there were always dire consequences. Many times, financial restitution had to be made. Even though sexual promiscuity and adultery are seen as okay and socially acceptable today in our modern world, that does not make it okay or make it right. These sins, they demand a high price that will be paid for one way or another. Do not allow yourself to be enticed. You might think, oh, nothing will happen to me. I won't get caught. And certainly the other person in this illicit affair will never tell anyone. Don't be deceived. Galatians 6:7 says this, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." So do not give up on doing good and seeking righteousness. You will never regret it, and God will reward you for your seeking to live in godly ways.